go. Hey, let's trade places. I think she's too short. You sit there and she's going to sit here. Come over here. Hello, everybody. We're getting ready to start a new story. And I've got my helpers here. Are you okay? You got COVID? No. Okay, good to hear that. So we're going to start a new story. Hey, you're supposed to be looking at the screen. We'll see if they can sit still long enough to get through a chapter. It's chapter 1, The Wrong Door of the Magician's Nephew. Good. You want to see the picture? Yeah. Okay. This is a story about something that happened a long time ago when your grandfather was a child. That would be me when I was a child, because I'm your grandfather. You shouldn't be looking at that phone while we're reading. You want to put it down?
I'm looking at...
He's playing Pokemon Go.
Yeah, have you ever played it?
Hi, Caleb. Hi, AJ and Marcus and Tristan and Aaron and Sierra and TT Ruth and TT Sarah and Jessica. All of you, hello. She says I don't have to say the names, I should just say hi. She's always got a better idea.
Hi, everybody.
This is Della, and this is Elias Wesley Holbrook.
I caught something good that turns into something really good.
You want to tell them what you caught?
But I don't...
Point it up at the camera, remember the camera.
Can you read this?
No, they can't. It's Pokemon. Okay, sit down. We're going to read a story now.
My full name is on my real name is Hola.
All right. This is called The Magician's Nephew, Chapter 1, The Wrong Door. This is a story about something that happened a long time ago when your grandfather, me, was a child. Can you believe that ever happened, that I was a child?
Wait,
but I didn't have Pokemon Go. I was baling hay.
You were baling hay.
It is a very important story because it shows how all the comings and goings between our own world and the land of Narnia first began. Wow. In those days, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, there she goes. You okay? Yeah. Was still living in Baker Street, and the Bastables were looking for a treasure in Lewisham Road. In those days, if you were a boy, you had to wear a stiff Eton collar every day, and the schools were usually nastier than they are now. As for the sweets, I won't tell you how cheap and good they were, because it would only make your mouth water in vain. And in those days, there lived in London a girl called Polly Plummer. She lived in one of the long row of houses which were all joined together. One morning, she was out in the back garden when a boy scrambled up from the garden next door and put his face over the wall. Polly was very surprised because until now there had never been any children in that house, only Mr. Ketterley and Miss Ketterley, a brother and sister, old bachelor and old maid, living together. So she looked up full of curiosity. The face was of a strange boy, very grubby. It could hardly have been grubbier if he had first rubbed his hands in the earth and then had a good cry and then dried his face with his hands. As a matter of fact, this was very nearly what he had been doing. "Hello," said Polly. "Hello," said the boy. "What's your name?" "Polly," said Polly. "What's yours?" "Digory," said the boy. "I say, what a funny name." "It isn't half so funny as Polly," said Digory. "No, it isn't," said... "Yes, it is," said Polly. "No, it isn't," said Digory. "At any rate, I do wash my face," said Polly, "which is what you need to do, especially after..." And then she stopped. She had been going to say, "after you've been blubbing," but she thought it wouldn't be polite. "All right, then," said Digory in a much louder voice, like a boy who was so miserable that he didn't care who knew that he had been crying. "If you lived all your life in the country and had a pony and a river at the bottom of the garden, and then had been brought to live in a beastly hole like this, you would cry too." "London isn't a hole," said Polly indignantly, but the boy was too wound up to take any notice of her, and he went on. "And if your father was away in India, and you had to come and live with an aunt and uncle who's mad, who would like that?" And if the reason was that they were looking after your mother, and your mother was ill and was going to die, then his face went the wrong sort of shape as it does when you're trying to keep back tears. I didn't know. I'm so sorry, said Polly humbly. And then, because she hardly knew what to say, and also to turn Digory's mind to cheerful subjects, she said, Is Mr. Ketterly really mad? Well, he's either mad, said Digory, or there's some other mystery. He has a study on the top floor, and Aunt Letty says I must never go up there. Well, that looks fishy to begin with. And then there's another thing. Whenever he tries to say anything to me at meal times, he never even tries to talk to her.
What?
He always shuts him up. She always shuts him up. She says, Don't worry the boy, Andrew. Or, I'm sure Digory doesn't want to hear about that. Or else, now, Digory, wouldn't you like to go out and play in the garden? What sort of things does he try to say? Said Polly. I don't know. He never gets far enough, but there's more than that. One night, it was the last night, in fact, I was going past the foot of the attic stairs on my way to bed. I don't much care for going past them either. I'm sure I heard a yell. Perhaps he keeps a mad wife shut up there. Yes, I've thought of that. Or perhaps he's a coiner. Or he might have been like a pirate, like the man in the beginning of Treasure Island, and be always hiding from his old shipmates. How exciting, said Polly. I never knew your house was so interesting. You may think it interesting, said Digory, but you wouldn't like it if you had to sleep there. How would you like to lie awake listening for Uncle Andrew's step to come creeping along the passage to your room? And he has such awful eyes. That is how Polly and Digory got to know one another, as it was just the beginning of summer holidays, and neither of them was going to the sea but that year. They met nearly every day. Their adventures began chiefly because it was one of the wettest and coldest summers there had been for years. That drove them to do indoor things. You might say indoor exploration. It is wonderful how much exploring you can do with a stump of candle in a big house, or in a row of houses. Polly had discovered long ago that if you opened a certain little door in the box room attic of her house, you would find the cistern and a dark place behind it, which you could get into by a little careful climbing. Can you let the dog in? Animal problems. Thank you, dear. Let him in, shut the door, and come back out. Come over here. You like the story so far?
Yeah.
It was a dark place. It was a long tunnel with a brick wall on one side and a sloping roof on the other. There were little chunks of light between the slates. There was no floor in this tunnel. You had to step from rafter to rafter, and between them there was only plaster. If you stepped on this, you would find yourself falling through the ceiling of the room below. Polly had used the bit of tunnel just inside the cistern as a smuggler's cave. She had brought up bits of old packing cases and seats of broken kitchen chairs and things of that sort, and spread them across from rafter to rafter so as to make a bit of floor. She kept a cash box containing various treasures, and the story she was writing, and usually a few apples. She had often drunk a quiet bottle of ginger beer in there. The old bottles make it look more like a smuggler's cave. Digory quite liked the cave. She wouldn't let him see the story, but he was more interested in exploring. Look here, he said. How long does this tunnel go on for? I mean, does it stop where your house ends? No, said Polly. The walls don't go out to the roof. It goes on. I don't know how far. Then we could get the length of the whole row of houses. So we could, said Polly. And oh, I say, what? We could get into the other houses. Yes, and getting taken for burglars? No thanks. Don't be so jolly clever. I was thinking of the house beyond yours. What about it? Why, it's the empty one. Daddy says it's always been empty ever since we came here. I suppose we ought to have a look at it then, said Digory. He was a good deal more excited than you would have thought from the way he spoke. For of course he was thinking just as you would have been of all the reasons why the house might have been empty so long. So was Polly. Neither of them said the word haunted, and both felt that once the thing had been suggested, it would be feeble not to do so now. Not to do it now. Shall we go and try it now? Said Digory. All right, said Polly. Don't, if you'd rather not, said Digory. I'm game if you are, said Polly. How are we to know when we're in the next house but one? They decided they would have to go out into a box room and walk across it, taking steps, as long as the steps from one rafter to the next. That would give them an idea of how many rafters it went to a room. Then they would allow about 4 more for the passage between the 2 attics and Polly's house, and then the same number for the maid's bedroom. As for the box room, that would give them the length of the house. When they had done that distance twice, they would be at the end of Digory's house. Any door they came to after that would let them into the attic of the empty house. But I don't expect it's really empty at all, said Digory. What do you expect? I expect someone lives there in secret, only coming in and out at night, with a dark lantern. We should probably discover a gang of desperate criminals and get a reward. It's all rot to say a house would be empty all these years unless there was some mystery. Daddy thought it must be the drain, said Polly. Pooh. Grown-ups are always thinking of uninteresting explanations, said Digory. Now that they were talking by daylight in the attic instead of in the candlelight in the smuggler's cave, it seemed much less likely that the empty house would be haunted. When they measured the attic, they had to get a pencil and do a sum. They both got different answers to it at first, and even when they got agreed, I'm not sure they got it right. They were in a hurry to start the exploration. We mustn't make a sound, said Polly, as they climbed in again behind the cistern. Because it was such an important occasion, they took a candle each. Polly had a good store of these in her cave. It was very dark and dusty and drafty as they stepped out from rafter to rafter without a word, except when they whispered to one another, "We're opposite your attic now," or "This must be halfway to your house." And neither of them stumbled, and the candles didn't go out, and at last they came to where they could see a little door in the brick wall on their right. There was no bolt or handle on this side of it, of course, for the door had been made for getting in, not for getting out. But there was a catch, as there often is in the inside of a cupboard door, which they felt sure they would be able to turn. "Shall I?" said Digory. "I'm game if you're game," said Polly, just as she had said before. Both felt that it was becoming very serious, but neither could draw back. Digory pushed round the catch with some difficulty. The door swung open, and the sudden daylight made them blink. Then, with a great shock, they realized that they were looking not into the deserted attic, but a furnished room. But it seemed empty enough. It was dead silent. Polly's curiosity got the better of her. She blew out her candle and stepped out into the strange room, making no more noise than a mouse. It was shaped, of course, like an attic, but furnished as a sitting room. Every bit of the walls were lined with shelves, and every bit of the shelves was full of books. A little bit like our house. Speak loud, they can hear you. What? Tell me. Quickly. I'm reading a story and we're recording. Okay, you can tell me after.
I've got a perfect Pikachu as my buddy. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right, sit down. It was shaped, of course, like an attic, but furnished like a sitting room. A fire was burning in the grate. Ooh, that means somebody had just been there. You remember that it was a very cold, wet summer that year, and in front of the fireplace with its back toward them was a high-backed armchair. Between the chair and Polly, and filling most of the middle of the room, was a big table piled with all sorts of things. Printed books, and books of the sort you'd write in, and ink and bottles and pens and sealing wax and a microscope. But what she noticed first was a bright red wooden tray with a number of rings on it. They were in pairs, a yellow one and a green one together, then a little space and another yellow one, and another green one. They were no bigger than ordinary rings, and no one could help noticing them because they were so bright. They were the most beautiful, shiny little things you can imagine. If Polly had been a little younger, she would have wanted to put one in her mouth. The room was so quiet that you noticed the ticking of the clock at once. And yet, as she now found, it was not absolutely quiet either. It was a very, very faint humming sound. Maybe. Let's find out. If vacuum cleaners had been invented in those days, Polly would have thought it was the sound of a Hoover being worked a long way off, several rooms away and several floors below. But it was a nicer sound than that, a more musical tone, only so faint that you could hardly hear it. "It's all right, there's no one here," said Polly over her shoulder to Digory. She was speaking above a whisper now, and Digory came out blinking and looking extremely dirty, as indeed Polly was too. "This is no good," he said. "It's not an empty house at all. We'd better leave before anyone comes." "What do you think these are?" said Polly, pointing at the colored rings. "Oh, come on," said Digory. The sooner he never finished what he was going to say, for at that moment something happened. The high-backed chair in front of the fire moved, and suddenly there rose up out of it, like a pantomime demon coming up out of a trapdoor, the alarming form of Uncle Andrew. They were not in the empty house at all. They were in Digory's house, and in the forbidden study. Both children said, "Oh," and realized their terrible mistake. They felt they ought to have known all along that they really hadn't gone far enough. Uncle Andrew was tall and very thin. He had a long, clean-shaven face with a sharply pointed nose, and extremely bright eyes, and a great tousled mop of gray hair. Let's find out. We got to keep reading. Digory was quite speechless, for Uncle Andrew looked 1,000 times more alarming than he ever had looked before. Polly was not so frightened yet, but she soon was. For the very first thing that Uncle Andrew did was to walk across to the door of the room, shut it, and turn the key in the lock. Then he turned around and fixed the children with his bright eyes and smiled, showing all of his teeth. "There," he said, "now my fool of a sister can't get at you." It was dreadfully unlike anything a grown-up would be expected to do. Polly's heart came into her mouth, and she and Digory started backing towards the little door they had come in by. Uncle Andrew was too quick for them. He got behind them and shut that door too, and stood in front of it. Then he rubbed his hands, made his knuckles crack. He had very long, beautifully white fingers. "I'm delighted to see you," he said. "Two children are just what I wanted." "Please, Mr. Ketterly," said Polly, "it's nearly my dinner time and I've got to go home. Will you please let us out?" "Not just yet," said Uncle Andrew. "This is too good of an opportunity to miss. You see, I'm in the middle of a great experiment. I've tried it on guinea pigs, and it seemed to work, but then a guinea pig can't tell you anything, and you can't explain to it how to come back." "Look here, Uncle Andrew," said Digory, "it really is dinner time, and they'll be looking for us in a moment. You must let us out." "Must?" said Uncle Andrew. Digory and Polly glanced at one another. They dared not say anything, but the glances met. "Isn't this dreadful? We must humor him." "If you let us go for our dinner now," said Polly, "we could come back after dinner." "Ah, but how do I know that you would?" said Uncle Andrew with a cunning smile. Then he seemed to change his mind. Well," he said, "if you really must go, I suppose you must. I can't expect two youngsters like you to find it much fun talking to an old buffer like me." He sighed and went on. "You have no idea how lonely I am sometimes. But no matter. Go to your dinner. But before you go, I must give you a present. It's not every day I see a little girl in my dingy study, especially, if I may say so, such an attractive young lady as yourself. Polly began to think that he might not really be mad after all. Wouldn't you like a dear? Wouldn't you like a ring, my dear? Said Uncle Andrew to Polly. Do you mean one of those yellow or green ones? Said Polly. How lovely. Not a green one, said Uncle Andrew. I'm afraid I can't give the green ones away. But I'd be delighted to give you one of the yellow ones.
Oh.
With my love. Come and try it on.
The green ones are the ones who are just metal and painted a different color. The yellow ones are just beautiful.
The green ones, I have a guess, are the ones that bring you back from wherever the yellow ones send you. From the magic world. He's really deceptive, this old man. Don't trust old men like that. No? You agree? Polly had now got quite over her fright and felt sure that the old gentleman was not mad. There was certainly something strangely attractive about those bright rings. We'll find out why in a minute. She moved over to the tray. Why, I declare, she said, the humming noise gets louder here. It's almost as if the rings were making it. What a funny fancy, my dear, said Uncle Andrew with a laugh. Ha, ha, ha. It sounded like a natural laugh, but Digory had seen an almost eager, greedy look in his face. Polly, don't be a fool, he shouted. Don't touch them. But it was too late. Exactly as he spoke, Polly's hand went out to touch one of the rings. And immediately, without a flash or a noise or a warning or of any sort, there was no Polly. Digory and his uncle were alone in the room. Wow, she went to another world or somewhere. What do you think? Where do you think she went? So the next chapter, chapter 2, is Digory and his uncle. I don't know why that's spelling backwards. I got to figure that out.
Oh, maybe it's because the video is doing that backwards.
Yes, flipping it. All right, take a look up here. Who do you want to say goodbye to?
Bye, Kayla. Bye, Tristan. Bye, everybody. I really need to tell you a lot of things before this video is done. So I got lots of good Pokemon and my sister's talking and okay.
I think he's going to kick me off here and take over the podcast.
Yeah, I'm gonna do it.
The first thing they said to me the last time we did this is, "Oh, I finally made it on YouTube." Okay, guys. Talk to you later.
Bye. Bye. Chapter 2 is coming up.
In another year or so, the pandemic will be over.
Yep. Well, years are very long, so.
Yeah, it's a long time. That's what I meant.